Hi there, I'm Daryl Black. Sorry to interrupt your Desperate Housewives or Lost. Is that still on? I'm not even sure what's on TV these days. Netflix maybe, or playing Fortnite. Um, Thanks for joining me. And have you ever wondered how to take your training to the next level? Particularly if you're a training officer or from a leadership perspective. Part of coaching, part of mentorship, part of teaching is really inherent in our job. So over the next little while, I'm going to introduce you to a training formula or a methodology that is very, very successful in high-risk environments. So it talks about what we need to do to approach training effectively, at what stages and what phases and what that looks like. We'll talk about how and when to introduce stress, for example, into a training program. This methodology can apply to something micro, so maybe it's learning about a particular piece of equipment, maybe a pump, but it can also apply to an incident management team, for example, and if you're creating a training program or new recruits or something like that. One of the challenges I've seen over my many years of doing this, both on the emergency response side and also the training, is that oftentimes we're elevated into a training officer or training director role really by acclamation. And we often know what to teach, PowerPoint and those sorts of things, but we don't actually know how to teach and really how to construct or deconstruct and recreate a training program that's reflective for high-risk environments. So if you can just give me a thumbs up, I would appreciate it, just to make sure that the feed's okay. All right, so one of the most critical concepts that I'm going to talk to you about, and it's overarching or underlying this entire approach to training for high-risk environments. It involves the crawl, walk, run. Okay? Crawl, walk, run. So what does that mean? Well, in very generic terms, it means we go really, really slow, just the basics, just an awareness, and then we eventually speed up the skill and the teaching of the skill to the midpoint here, and then we eventually get to the point where we're running. And that's, if you're looking at it from maybe a Star Wars perspective, Luke Skywalker, A New Hope. He goes to Dagobah. Oh my goodness, I'm going to nerd out here. But, oh, you know what? No, he just met Obi-Wan Kenobi. And if you tune out with this analogy, I am so sorry, but it's best I can come up with on Facebook Live. He meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan, puts the blast shield thing down, and he's got that little rotating thing there, and he tries to hit it. He's trying to use the Force. That's really the very basics of what we're talking about with regard to crawl. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we can get, say, Yoda. All right, he's a Jedi Master, and he is definitely running. Absolutely. So that's really the spectrum by which we will be talking about this crawl, walk, run. In practical terms, an example that comes to mind that I'm familiar with is, say, Special Forces training. So when they're given a particular operation, let's say it's to storm a building or something like that, well, the very first thing they'll do is they'll first discuss the operation. It's handed down, and then they just try to figure out, get a lay of the land for it a little bit. So they're in a meeting or a series of meetings, they're standing up, sitting down, whatever that looks like. But there's no actual action taken at this point. So once they've discussed it, maybe they're going to now map it out. So they'll find an aircraft hangar or a gymnasium or something like that. And if they have the right specs, they'll map it out on the floor, maybe with tape or something like that. And then they'll just walk through it, and they'll get an idea for their angles, and they'll shoot their hands, as they call it, all sorts of things. I'm not a Green Beret or SEAL or anything like that, nor do I play one on TV, but I work a lot with them. So this is typically how they approach it. So once they've done that, then if they're in a position that they're able to build walls, they'll start to do the walls for this particular structure, or whatever the case is, or this floor. And then they're not going in guns blazing quite literally. They'll still continue to walk. Maybe it's got their equipment on with them, but no weapons or anything like that. And again, they're discussing, they're talking, they're contingency planning, all sorts of things. So right now they've crawled, they're walking, and the operation would be inherently risky if they stopped there. So obviously in a life and death situation, a high risk environment, technical expertise is critical. And again, we'll talk about what that looks like a little bit further here. They'll eventually get to the point where maybe they're using blanks or dummy rounds. So you've got the auditory stimuli, you've got physical, maybe they're going to crank the heat up. They're going to, as closely as possible, simulate the environment in which they're going to operate. So more on that here shortly. So the analogy, or the cliche, I guess, is train like you fight, fight like you train. So by the time they're running in this phase, they're doing live ammunition, they're shouting out, they're now coming up with all sorts of complications, so doors blocked, weapons jammed, all of those types of things. But if they were to do that right off of the bat, the operation would go incredibly horribly. And so what they're doing, and these are very, very well trained people, just like your firefighters and EMS workers and people in EOCs. These are not dumb people. They're used to doing this, but still, anytime you're introducing a new concept or skill or series of skills, you need to take into account crawl, walk, run. So if you're just joining us here, we're just talking about how best to frame and formulate your training program and really build into your trainings different phases that in particular take into account the ability to make decisions, communicate effectively, basically operate under stress. All right, so thanks for joining us. Give me a thumbs up again. Awesome, thank you. So now how do we apply this to, say, a high-risk environment? So let's say it's firefighting, wildland, structural, and you want to teach pump operations. Well, pretty benign example, but at least you'll get the gist of it. The crawl phase would be probably just the awareness. So you're going to just, get them familiar with the overall operation of the pump, what it does, how it does it, various simple components, like how do you turn it on, how do you check oil, how do you, refuel it, something like that, how do you store it properly, so on and so forth. Just the basics. So that's the crawl phase. And then maybe the walk looks like maybe a little bit deeper dive. So you're going to explain the fuel system to them. You're going to talk about the ignition part of it. You're going to talk about some of the pump operation, the impellers, the carburetor, all of those types of things, or fuel injection, whatever it might be, in this walk phase. So now you've gone from the basic skill to now something a little bit more in depth, and now you're going to start introducing how to troubleshoot it. Okay, but again, at a very basic level. So we are starting to go down this spectrum. We're going down this road just with pump operations. Again, apply it to any other skill that you want. Key point is we train technical skills first and then introduce stress into it. So we'll talk more about that here shortly. Technical skills first and then introduce some stress. So maybe the run for pump is now they need to really troubleshoot more complex problems. Not enough fuel, it's not starting, whatever that looks like. So you're really starting to challenge them intellectually and physically on how we're going to make this thing operate. Maybe you're going to amp it up and say you need to keep pressure up over 30 meters uphill in a certain diameter hose, whatever that looks like. And you're continually amping it up and adding complexity. But here's the thing, they will be fully engaged at this point because they've already learned the basic operations, they've learned the basic troubleshooting, and now what you're doing is just layering on complexity. So a question that comes up quite often is, what does it look like in terms of mastery of a skill? Well, a lot of times we train until they get it right. I've said it, I've heard it. Yeah, good, let's train. We're going to keep going until you guys get this right. Well, how about this? In a high-risk environment, how about we train until we don't get it wrong? Okay? We're talking about life and death, particularly in skills on the fire ground, for example. Okay? So we will train until they don't get it wrong. Key tenet. All right? So we're now at the point of the run, and you're probably wondering, geez, like this is a pretty soft beach ball approach here. We're not going to hold their hands throughout this entire process. High risk environments, it's hard. It's shitty. it's hard on people. It's rough and it's tumble and it's difficult and it's not for the faint of heart and so on and so forth. And I absolutely agree. But what we're going to start to do now is we are going to introduce some stress to this only after they've got the technical skills down first. And at what point are we going to introduce the stress? Well, at the now run phase, okay? And typically towards the end of it, okay? Towards the end of the run phase. Critical point. We are introducing stress with the intent to seat the skill. Okay? We're not introducing stress to overwhelm them. We're not here to create scar tissue learning where they're scared poopless to do this skill. They're shaking, so on and so forth. That is not what we're trying to achieve here with stress. We are actually using stress as an emotional grounding to seat the skill. Emotion is a physical glue that binds an experience into a memory. Okay? You need emotion tied to something for you to really, really remember it. So maybe that's stress, maybe that's humor, maybe that's anger, maybe that's joy, whatever it is. But in our environment, using stress as that chemical glue is super important. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start to introduce stress. To give you an example of this kind of emotional attachment, why we need emotion, just think to yourself, 9/11, 2001. Where were you? And I would submit to you that 99% of the people watching know exactly where they were when they heard about the news. To the point where they remember if they were at the kitchen table and what cereal they were eating. And that is a very, very typical kind of example. So give me a thumbs up if you remember where you were on 9/11, 2001. Most of you watching should have been alive then. All right, so that's an example. So thank you. Now, let's contrast that 5 years later. So September 11th, 2006. I don't know where I was, but I certainly remember where I was in 2001. So that's an example there. 5 years later, which in theory we should be able to remember, we can't. Okay, so that's really in a nutshell what we're talking about with regard to creating some sort of emotion, because it's that chemical glue that makes an experience into a memory. All right, so that's what we're doing here. Perfect. Now, you want to ask yourself, well, what are we going to do now for stress? Well, here's the beautiful part. We've done crawl, walk, run for that technical skill. We've got it to the point where even under mild stress, they don't get it wrong. Excellent. So you know what that means is let's now start to train for stress inoculation. Let's go into the stress inoculation phase following the technical skills phase. Okay? Now, the timing of this is all dependent on the time you have, the type of people you're working with, is it a training program, all sorts of things. But one of the problems I see often is the fact that we jump straight to the run and lots of stress and people check out, particularly volunteers, right? If you're working with a lot of volunteers, it's not that they're any less capable by any stretch, but if they are scared to come or they're reluctant or they're feeling apprehension to go into training on a Monday night because they're going to get yelled at or they're going to be put under extreme pressure, ain't no one got time for that, right? They're going to check out. So from a volunteer perspective, think about how valuable this is in developing your people and developing the skills effectively and also building confidence. All right? Okay, so now we're going to start doing the stress. So same thing, we're going to crawl, walk, run with that. We're going to introduce mild stress to start. Keep in mind they've now got the technical skill. We're going to start introducing a little stress. And there are a bunch of different ways we can do it. And they're really easy and they're really cheap. Some are even free. First one is time. All right? So if we introduce time, it's amazing. If you need to assemble a Mark III pump, if I've got 48 hours to do it, heck, I've never disassembled or reassembled one, but chances are over the course of 48 to 72 hours, I might be able to make it work. So not a lot of stress, right? But now let's go ahead and throw time at it. Hey guys and gals, you've got 10 minutes to put certain parts back together. Just this arbitrary thing that we call time, introduce that and that automatically amps up the stress. And by saying you've got 10 minutes, that costs $0. $0. And even within time, you can start big. You got 15 minutes, then you can start to, close that time off as much as you need to. It's amazing what just that simple thing does to stress levels. How else can we do it? Well, competition, healthy competition. All right, we don't want anyone at one team laying the boots to the other one, or meeting at the bike rack, or going all Anchorman style with tridents and things escalating in a hurry. We're talking about healthy competition. So you get one opponent, or maybe two, depending on how many people you have. You do, boom, this thing's a race. It's amazing how that emotion, right, ties into the stress levels, and people need to start acting differently. And they need to start to figure out how to operate when they're in a rush, when they're having people yelling at them, go, 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 or no, 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 stop, whatever that is. Healthy competition is another way that we can introduce stress. And even with healthy competition, same thing. We can really amp it up and change what the competition looks like. Maybe it starts off as just, rookies versus rookies. And then if you really want to amp it up, let's go now maybe mid-year people and rookies. Or you can go senior people and mid-year people. All of those things, even within that, you can start to amp up the stress. All right? Can we get a thumbs up? All right, perfect. Good, good, good. So competition is another one. Another way of doing it is, I'll just call it get the heart rate up. Okay, so heart, and I'll just draw an arrow because I'm not an artist. All right, getting the heart rate up. Time and time and time again in after action reviews where people have suffered fatalities, for example, when basically you're wondering, geez, what were they thinking? Well, they weren't. Okay, they weren't. They were operating under stress, and maybe that was a physical stress, the heart rate being up, the pulse is, or the breathing is rapid, so on and so forth. Many, many, many examples of this. So a technique or tactic that, say, smoke jumpers use is do a few laps, get that heart rate up, do interval training, something like that, and then do the skill. It's amazing what that does. Have them do wind sprints, have them do a longer run, and then start to assemble the Mark III pump, for example. It's amazing how that works. And you're starting to get really close to the environment in which they're going to be operating sometimes, where the pulse is up, the breathing's rapid, they're sweating, so on and so forth. They're tired, okay? So we're starting to really amp this up. So we've got time, competition, the heart rate can go up. 4, inputs go up. And by inputs, we're talking about sensory inputs. So specifically things that are distracting. Loud noises, yelling, a leaf blower. Man, oh man, those things are kick-ass in a training program. Not just for blowing your leaves, but that is irritating as heck if you've got a leaf blower going. It's a very effective technique. So you've got that auditory kind of bombardment. Maybe you've got visual. You've got flashing lights, strobes, maybe loss of light. So they have to start doing some things in low light conditions or no light conditions. That will automatically amp the stress up even more. And the 5th one, it's kind of related to number 4. Moulage, or what we call experiential training. Sorry, my writing's horrible, but all right, that's experiential, not extraterrestrial. All right, so moulage, that's that kind of fake makeup stuff if you're doing first aid scenarios or medical scenarios. It's amazing. Again, tied pretty closely into that, into the sensory inputs, but experiential learning. Remember that whole saying around how do we learn and visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, and so on and so forth. Well, the statistics are resounding that if we are hands-on, if we're being tactile with something, our ability to remember or retain and recall that information goes through the roof. One of the reasons for that is, remember this emotion piece? That's what we're trying to do here, particularly with the inputs and the moulage and just the experiential training. We're really starting to seat or introduce the emotion, which is in this case stress, into the training environment. And that creates that emotion, which is that chemical glue that binds the experience into a memory, so it makes it seats it there. Now, keeping in mind that even within all 5 of these things, we've got we've got ranges of complexity. So even as I talked about time, we can do 10 minutes, we can do 2 minutes. We can, the heart rate up. We can make them run 25 wind sprints, or we can get them to do 10, whatever that looks like. The moulage, the experiential, we can do particular little parts of the technical skill, for example. We don't have to do the full on. So if we were to look at the perspective of a training program for, say, an incident management team, all of these things will apply, probably not the heart rate, because I'm on an IMT and there's not a lot of times where we're physically out of breath when we're operating. Maybe too much coffee, yeah, that's a legit issue, but we're not going to be running around the EOC during an operation. So, with the exception of that, but the rest can actually apply. Okay, so does that make sense so far? We're almost done. All right, thumbs up on that one. Perfect. All right, so now, what are some watchouts? Well, I'm going to make some notes, or I'm going to just refer to some notes to make sure I don't get any, or don't make any mistakes here, but introducing the stress too early. So remember the crawl, walk, run? Like we talked about, if you're introducing stress right off the bat, it's going to create scar tissue learning where the memory is not going to be a pleasant one of confidence and, shoot, I can do this. It's going to be, oh my God, I cannot do this. I hope it doesn't happen to me. I'm going to let my brothers and sisters down. Somebody's going to die, so on and so forth. And I promise you that if that's your training approach, it's not effective. It's not doing the job properly. All right? So we've also got now not enough stress. So not introducing anything with regard to any stress at all. It's just a walk in the park. There's no time constraints. There's no input, sensory inputs or overloads or anything like that. You need stress to seat the knowledge. You need stress to seat that technical skill so that they can remember it and recall it. All right? Half-assing your training, right? This is serious stuff, okay? This is a high-risk environment. One of the challenges we run into is that a lot of this training is low frequency, so it doesn't happen often, but high consequence. So firefighter entrapment, if Mike McFadden and CFD TOs are watching, props to you guys, fantastic job. That's what, that's important stuff. But if you're just going through the motions, hey, let's just go through the tunnel, you got some wires that are hooking you up, oh, too bad, so sad, good work, have a good day. That's not doing your service any favors, and more importantly, you're not doing your firefighters any favors or the team any favors. And related to that, thinking it will never happen to you, where, you know what, let's not worry about some of these skills. This is a lot of time and effort that Daryl's talking about. He's talking about doing technical skills first, crawl, walk, run. And then we introduce stress. Oh, stress inoculation phase. So we got a technical phase. Then we have stress inoculation phase. Hey, dude, we got Monday nights if you're, volunteer service, or Wednesday nights. We don't have time for all this stuff. I can promise you that if you do it right, your retention will actually go up because people will enjoy going through the crawl, walk, run. They'll enjoy learning the technical skills first, and then you'll add a little stress and they'll leave, hey, I got this. Okay? So pay attention to that. This is a deliberate approach to your training program and your training skills. So now, there's some advantages. So those are kind of your new people, for example, or you're teaching a new skill. But there are some advantages to your senior people. One of them is they are now measured at the new normal. So for example, you don't have to go back to, let's say the pump example, where you don't have to go back to, hey, here's a Mark III pump. Yay, thanks tips. No, what you do is you introduce their new normal, which is at that run phase with some stress applied. There are no free rides in this game. If you're a senior person, you should be able to perform at a higher level than, say, somebody that's brand new. Okay, so it's continually challenging them. And what you can do with the senior people is you can start to increase the stress, but do it in a measured fashion. The other thing you can do is this training that's being done here can be done by senior people, particularly the crawl phase and maybe the walk, where It's an opportunity for senior people that have a lot of experience. It's not rocket science, working a pump or something like that. It's something that they've probably been doing for many, many years. It's a great opportunity for them to reinforce it in themselves. Okay, nothing like teaching to reinforce it, but also they can get some confidence and start to interact with the new people, for example, and it empowers them. So there's a lot of advantages to your brand new people and also your senior people. One of the problems I see, or one of the issues I see in emergency services and high-risk environments is we eat our young. And by that I mean we are hard on our brand new people because that's how we learned, right? We are a product of our environment. So as a result, we tend to be hard on people because that's how we learned, right? You gotta learn to suck it up, so on and so forth. That's old school, and that's not creating the best product for the citizens. It's not working for your service, and it sure as hell ain't working for that individual member. Your job as a training officer, as a leader, is to support and empower your people. Give them the technical training first, get their confidence up, seek that memory, and seek those skills, introduce some stress, and then go into the stress inoculation phase. Think about that. If you were to take that approach, the technical skills, to the point where we don't get it wrong, and then we start doing stress inoculation, man, oh man, you're going to have a kick-ass team, you're going to have a kick-ass service, kick-ass organization, you name it. And we can do that for every single skill. Okay, we can do that for every single skill. So give me a quick thumbs up. Appreciate that. I hope the audio was okay here, but I appreciate your time. And if you're rewatching this, thanks for also rewatching.